I put this together just because, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's some lettuces and some kale and some pansies and violas and things like that, and everything in this pot is edible. And I think it's pretty. Well, it's pretty enough just like that. Oh, it's got some chives in there too. But I like to accessorize because that's just the way I do things. You need something spiky and round and frilly, and sometimes you haven't got it, so you just got to go cut it from the trees and then throw a little goldenrod in there. And I think it looks pretty, like a bouquet. Perfectly edible. And what I want y'all to do is take a look on each of these stems, the individual flowers. Each one of you have a piece of a stem off one of these things, a little piece of stem, and look at on the individual thing. I don't know if y'all. Okay, I think my antihistamine. Don't do that. Don't do that. I thought it was just my antihistamines kicking in. Yeah, but anyway, if you look at these, if you can pull one off an individual little flower, if you can do that, just a tiny little flower. The reason I want you to do that because that is an entire flower. It's like a little sunflower or a zinnia or a chrysanthemum. They're all in the same family. Every one of these little things, these tiny little things, is an individual flower. And the reason I wanted you to do that, because when you see these vast fields of this kind of stuff, you're a little bit more up close and personal to it now, because it makes more sense. Every one of those, if you can pull off the tiny little petals on it, point, she loves me, point, she loves me not, point, she loves. Every one of those is a petal like on a sunflower. And the reason I wanted to emphasize this because a lot of people blame this little thing right here on your allergies. And it's not. This has got real sticky pollen, and it won't float in the wind, and it won't get from flower to flower. It's got to be carried by insects, sticks to insects, and take it from. And goldenrod is the single most pollinator-friendly native plant we have. Of all the flowers out there, this supports more stuff, including little things that eat on it, and bigger things that eat those, and bigger things that eat those, and then the birds come in and eat the little seeds. And when these dry into seed heads, you can actually take them and mix them into some flour as an extender because it's in the same family as sunflower seeds. It's just a little stupid stuff to know. But what's blowing around in the wind right now is ragweed. If you thump a ragweed plant, okay, that's what you're trying to do, make me sound taller and smarter. There you go. Anyway, it's the ragweed that floats around that makes us all sneeze, not the goldenrod. So the reason I like to do that is just to get people to touch stuff, I guess. Anyway, let's look at some stuff about gardening real quick. How many of y'all have seen the display they got of me upstairs? Nah? I just want to let y'all know I feel important at the MAC. I don't know why they did that, but they got a little bottle tree of mine in there, and it's just, I guess am I a culture thing? I'm just a guy from the Delta, flunked out of Moorhead. Glad to be back in Meridian. There's so many interesting things going on here that, let's see if I can, for some reason I can't see this monitor. Anyway, I took this picture back in the spring of the camellias that were blooming. This is echoing real bad in here. And I'm afraid if you touch a button, it's going to squawk. So, okay, there we go. Anyway, back in the spring, these camellias are blooming, and it's only a week or so before the camellia sasanqua start to bloom. And if you have camellia sasanqua in the fall and camellia japonica in the winter, you can have color all winter when our friends up north have got undulating mounds in the snow. So it's just a kind of unusual thing. Some of you may know I live in England part of the year. I just got back about 3 weeks ago. I'm there in the summer and to cover flower shows and things like that. And in the wintertime, because I don't have anything to do here. And so I just go over there. It's cold over there, but the beer's warm. So that's always a nice thing. I do have a little garden. That's one of my gnomes, and I've got some some peas and some basil and oregano. is what they call it over there, and little bottle trees and stuff, because wherever I go, I want to have a little garden, because I'm a gardener. I'm a gardener. That's what I do. I got a little bigger area with some hollyhocks and some roses and things. But one of the things I want to emphasize is, how many of y'all know what zone we're in, plant zone? What zone are we in? 8, something like that? You know, England is too, same zone. Same exact zone, zone 8, which means it gets down into the teens sometimes in the winter. That's all the zone is based on. How cold does it get in the wintertime? It gets down in the teens, that's zone 8. It gets down in the 20s, that's zone 9. Below that, zone 7. The reason I mention that, because everybody wants to know, what zone am I in? I live in Meridian, I'm in zone 8. Well, all that means is you're going to freeze part of the year for a day. It doesn't take into account our heavy rainfalls. Like, Southern California only gets 10 inches a year. We get 6 times that much. It doesn't take into account the fact that it'll get down to 20 degrees here after 3 weeks of 70. And plants have sort of warmed up, and then all of a sudden they get a mild freeze. There are plants that'll take 10 below zero that will freeze in Meridian because it's a sudden freeze. In the summertime in England, it gets up to the mid-80s, maybe the 90s, but it cools down to the 60s at night. And the reason I mention all that, because people want to know what zone we're in. This viola, I took this picture a month ago. It was growing all summer in a crack of a sidewalk. How's that going to work here? Not too good. See, so zones are not that big a deal. As a horticulturist, I get frustrated because I want to get things exact, want to get precise. And you just can't get precise with gardening. When I'm walking around, there's lupins, wild lupins. They grow all over the place out there. And they have foxgloves growing everywhere. And they pull these up and throw them away because they're weedy. They pull foxgloves up because they're just weedy. They're everywhere. They're just weeds. Okay, and we would do anything. Now, they do have some different varieties. Y'all come on in. They have different varieties which are more garden worthy. But the fact is, it's still a weed over there. And we can't grow them here at all. Well, we've got a native lupin, but it's not that great. Reason I mention this is because as I go around all over the place, I'm always looking for cool plants that will grow here. And there are some plants in England that grow really, really well. There's a fella in Wales. He's got a nursery called Happy Valley Nursery. And it's actually the 4th generation. But in the 1930s, the original owner of it started hybridizing chrysanthemums. Any of y'all grow this one called Clara Curtis or Country Girls? Big pink flowers that start blooming, another 3 or 4 weeks. In late October, November, I see it all over the countryside, all over Mississippi, all over the South, from Oklahoma to the Carolinas. And it's just a pink floppy thing that's not that great. If you prune it, it bushes out and it looks better. It has more flowers. But in general, it's just it doesn't need anything. It grows in cemeteries. It grows around Creighton Burrows, country garden, poor part of town, all over the place. Country Girls, Clara Curtis. Well, the same guy who did that did all of these, all different kinds. And so I've been looking, and this is in my little garden. These are the same kind of things as that Country Girls. Why don't we grow this? Because nobody got it and started it. If we put one of these, let's say this one or this one, in Meridian in a master gardener's hands, next year it's going to be sold at their plant sale. Next year it's going to be all over here. Next year it's going to be all over the state, because people tend to share plants if the plants are worth sharing. So that's what I do. Is I look for not new exciting plants, but really durable versions of good old dependable plants. And because of that, we can have daffodils in the spring. We can have these in the fall. And so we can have gardens that really don't need a whole bunch of care. I went to this thing this summer called Floriade. It's Europe's largest flower show in the world. They have it every 10 years. I've been to 4 of them, every 10 years. And there's people from all over the world come together and set up these little display gardens. And it's open for like 4 months. So it's a constant changing thing. This plant in the foreground is native to Lauderdale County, Mississippi. It's called Joe Pye weed. And when I'm over there, and they do stuff like this, I'm thinking, I'm okay. Because I put a little flagstone walk in my back garden last year, and where I needed a little rock, I stuck a bottle down in it. And so I'm thinking, I'm being really, really cool and smart, and come to find out I'm just an amateur. Having a good time with that. This is a wall that they made, an urban wall with stacked up stuff and some old concrete culvert type things. But look at the goldenrod in the foreground, native to Mississippi. It's not native to Europe. Every plant in this picture, every single plant in this picture is native to Mississippi in European type gardens. And I see this everywhere I go, all native. Downtown Amsterdam. You know, any of y'all grow this passion flower? Any of y'all grow it? It just comes up everywhere. It's like my hair. It just comes up everywhere. Well, this is the kind of plant where we sometimes appreciate it, but it's an old country roadside plant. A lot of us don't grow it, partly because we don't think about it, or we were raised with it, or we're bored with it, or you can't buy it at a garden center. But it's the kind of plant where it's cherished all over the world, our native stuff. The oldest botanic garden in Europe from the early 1600s, the only sculpture they've got in the entire oldest botanic garden in Europe is our magnolia. They don't have any other sculptures. The only one is our magnolia because it's such an incredibly interesting botanical oddity. Whatever killed the dinosaurs couldn't kill this. This evolved before we had bees. It's pollinated by beetles. So, but I'm just saying that all over the place, they appreciate the kind of stuff we've got. They also appreciate something that we overlook. How many of y'all are on the Mississippi Gardening Facebook thing? Okay. You know there's some weird people on there. I'm not talking about you, Nate. Bless Nate's heart. You know, he's only 23. He's going to be great one of these days, but he needs to get some white hair growing out of his ears and calm down. He's just too excited right now. But one of the things that everybody's moaning about is that having to pull up their plants because it's going to freeze and all this color's gone and we're going to be bored till next spring. This is a garden in the middle of the winter in northern England. Every botanic garden over there has an area set aside specifically to be at its peak in the middle of the winter by pulling plants all over the place that look good in the winter into one little thing. They design so that they have something to look at and enjoy all year. They don't have that little downtime. And there's all sorts of things, shapes and textures and colors and forms, all of these things in the wintertime. See, so you can do that in your garden too instead of, wondering what am I going to do in December, January when nothing's out there. In December, January, February, ride around country, ride around town and look at individual plants that are really looking good and then pull them together. Y'all remember Rumpelstiltskin? Wove golden garments out of what? Common straw. Golden garments out of common straw. That's all we're doing. And there's some cool plants. These are some hardy succulents. If you think that we can't grow stuff like that outside, this is taken in Jackson, Tennessee, in a parking lot. We have some really, really good, unusual texture and shape plants that are exciting, more in the wintertime because there's not much out there. By the way, I gave a talk at a flower show in northern England about a month or so ago, and they let me judge the floral design. And this is the one I gave first prize to. You know why? Just because it's so sweet. Everybody else did all these fancy stuff. That person worked really, really hard going around and just got 3 little flowers and put a little vase. And so it got first place because of the attitude of that. The attitude of that, like looking at the goldenrod things up close. It's a nice little bouquet too. We see goldenrod at flower shows in England. They use it as a cut flowers, terrific plant. I see it in old gardens, old botanic gardens. It's something we don't plant because it's all over the place, but it's one of their top 10 summer and fall perennials because it's just a good plant. You know, one of fellow garden writer over there. Y'all know Monty Don. Have you ever seen Monty Don on Garden World? He's just as creepy as I am, but he's nicer. He's on TV. He said, "You Americans poo-poo your asters and your goldenrod, and you come over to England and take pictures of your asters and your goldenrod because it's just something we overlook." But just like I mentioned with the Clara Curtis, there are, this big tall goldenrod, There must be 75 different named varieties of goldenrod. There's a good dozen that are completely different. This is one that's called fireworks. That's as big as it gets, and it doesn't run all over the place. You plant it, it spreads like clump monkey grass, a little at a time, like an orange daylily. But that's called fireworks. See, so you can have really cool plants if we just stop thinking of them as weeds. That's the whole idea. Royal Botanic Garden, Royal Horticultural Society just opened up their first new botanic garden in 70 years. They've got 6 now. This is Bridgewater up in north of England. And I went there for the opening. I happened to be there during COVID. I kind of got stuck there, which is boo-hoo. Got stuck in England during COVID. But I went to the opening of this botanic garden, and I noticed in their biggest flower borders, every flower in that is native to Lauderdale County, Mississippi. And they grow them because they're cool plants. All native plants. All of these are native. See, and the reason they grow them isn't because they're native or they're wildflowers. They grow them because they're good flowers. They're just good flowers. We want to grow lupins. We want to grow their kind of stuff that they grow. They want to grow our stuff. And so their weeds we cherish, our weeds they cherish. And the point I'm trying to make is they don't grow them because they're native or they're wildflower. They grow them as good plants. And they mix them together and repeat them in colors. By the way, that's what it looked like in the summertime. I went back this past winter, same garden. And in a way, it's kind of cool. I would hit some of that with spray paint. That's because that's just the way I am. But here's another shot. All native plants, and in the wintertime, it looks like this. And they leave it up there because the little birds feed on the seeds. And then they clean it up a little bit. Let me see. Oh, here's one more, our native sumac. Any of y'all allergic to sumac? How about poison ivy? Well, this is not poison ivy. It's related. This is the sumac you see along the roadside. It has brilliant fall colors. Those things right there, what are going to be berries, they would be close to the kind of off-white flowers earlier, loaded with bees and butterflies. But you could take that stuff and wash it in water and strain it and add a little sugar, and it tastes just like lemonade. Matter of fact, you can rub your hands on it, lick your finger, and it tastes like lemonade. It's got as much vitamin C as an orange. And when it falls off in the wintertime, the birds eat it. There's some birds that depend on the seeds of sumac. This is what it looked like in the summertime. Here it is in the winter. Cool plants. And we just overlook them. So anyway, you get the idea. All these plants, including our oak leaf hydrangea back in the back there, all these are native. One thing they do, though, is they tend to accessorize. They got the goldenrod here. You got goldenrod, got the black-eyed Susan, the Joe Pye weed, all that. But what they did is they put a little piece of fence in it, just a little piece of split rail fence to make it look like it's in Meridian. Because without the fence, it's just, plants, just plants. But they put a little accessory out there, and that way the flowers come and go, but that fence is still there, so they have daffodils and stuff in the spring, and then other things in the summer, and just like that. What about, out of sight. Any of y'all grow daffodils? Any spread? Have any of y'all, does this look bad to y'all? Would it be okay to have something like that in your yard? Would it? They're daffodils, right? Isn't that cool? And then time to mow the grass, you just cut them down and got the grass, right? These come up in the fall, they bloom in the spring. When it's time to cut the grass, you just cut it down. You got nothing. You got a lawn. You got a lawn in the summer and daffodils in the spring. Y'all okay with that? Well, what if you were to substitute dandelions? The little yellow flowers that come up in the fall, they bloom in the spring. Time to mow the grass, you just mow your grass. You can have a summer lawn and dandelions in the winter. The same principle is the daffodil thing. The difference is you plant the daffodils and you want them to spread, you spray these things because they're weeds. See, there's a movement going around. It's not a movement, it's a lazy anti-movement. The movement was towards having pristine, perfect lawns, a horticultural thing. I literally wrote the foreword to the best-selling lawn care book in the South. I know turf grass. But I also know you don't have to do all that stuff that's in the book. Just mow. Just mow what grows, and you'll have a pretty good lawn. That's what we did as a kid before we had, weed killers and all that kind of stuff. But if you had the henbit, which is edible, by the way, and the dandelions, which are edible, and had them in your lawn and just mowed it, in the summertime, they would disappear. No matter how bad you wanted to keep those and daffodils, but the grass would come up and grow just fine. See? So the movement is away from having a perfect lawn towards having a mow it grows lawn. The problem is some people still have this idea that if you got weeds, you're a bad person. You know who taught us that? People sell weed killers. It's a marketing thing. If they call it the battle. There used to be advertisers. Even in World War II, they advertised it, saying if you don't have a nice lawn, you're not patriotic. They had those ads. But look at this, little violets. Just try to get rid of those things. You can't. So instead of trying to get rid of them, just relax with it. And they're edible. They're edible. A little plant called blue-eyed grass, which is native. It's in the iris family. It's native to Mississippi. These are terrific little plants that bloom in late February and March and April. You mow your grass, they're gone. Not a big deal. How do we get away with that, though, without the neighbors complaining? Well, first of all, you redefine what a weed is in your mind. Any master gardeners here? What is a weed? Something you don't want. Plant out of place. A rose growing in a cornfield is a weed. Okay, a plant out of place. Well, there's a new definition that helps a lot. It's a little bit different worldview, but it's this right here. If it's not bothering you, it's not a weed. If it's not bothering you, it's not a weed. And that's true. So what you have to do is you have to let people know that this is not a weed to you. This isn't bothering you. You like this. And how you do that? You have a lawn like this, which is in a very upscale neighborhood in Jackson, and they just decided to just mow what grows. They got the guys that stopped spraying, and in the summertime, it is a perfect lawn. In the wintertime, they have all this kind of stuff, and the way they get away with it is that we made a little sign put out in their yard, a little sign, and people look at it. That's a bunch of, hang on, they're doing this on purpose. My bad, and they let them get away with it. See? So all we're trying to do in Mississippi State, working with Texas A&M and University of North Carolina and a couple of others, are working with a program of designing a publication on here are the best weeds to grow for a winter and spring meadow that doesn't interfere with the summer lawn. We're actually working and coming up with a sign I made that and I cut it out and just stuck it out there. But coming up with a sign that's acceptable. So if you want to do that, instead of yard of the month, you might get meadow of the month. And with a few little guidelines. Here's the things that here's how you do it. And here's a real quick tip. If you want to do something like that, put you some daffodils out with it. And when they bloom, the neighbors will say, okay, we get it. Daffodils are okay. It's the transitive property, what is it? Any math teachers here? That it's an algebraic thing. If A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then C is equal to A, transitive property. So if daffodils are okay, dandelions are okay. See, that's all we're saying. That's all we're saying. And if nothing else, just leave a clump out there. Just mow around one clump. You'll have all the bees in your yard will be on that. And the Easter bunny can find a place to lay an egg. And that's cool. See, so that's all we're trying to say. A little at a time, just a little bit at a time. Or you can have no grass at all. This is in Jackson. That's all mondo grass. They mow it once a year. They probably need to do something about the moss that's growing on the walkway. But all of this is just plain old mondo grass. They mow it once a year. And that's it. 100% shade. Or you can have a combination. So a little grass, a little mulch, a little ground cover. That's what a mature landscape has, not wall-to-wall grass and a bunch of gumdrops and meatballs up against your house. It's starting to add texture and color and texture. With fall coming on, we have so many plants that have good fall color, not like they do in New England, but we have, the dogwoods aren't, there are no slouches in the fall. If they don't bloom, they still got good fall color. See, so we're looking for things for all seasons. By the way, this is what sumac looks like in the fall. This isn't a garden jacket. Unfortunately, when they saw some along the roadside, the ones that they dug up and put in their yard, was from a male colony. Sumac are separate male and female. They make colonies. If you get a male colony, it won't have the berries. So if you want ones that got fall color and those berries, find some that got the clusters on them and put some of that in your yard. Any questions about that? No? That's not a good picture. It's too bright, but that is actually in the middle of the winter, a type of dwarf nandina. It's called flirt. That's the biggest it gets. Doesn't have flowers, doesn't have berries. Nobody's complaining about it being invasive. But in a traffic island with no water in Mississippi, and it looks like that in the wintertime, could you see some daffodils poking up in there? Maybe a rock or a gnome or something, so it's just about. But anyway, we have some good, dependable plants that don't need a whole bunch of care and stuff. In the fall, we have the Sasanqua camellias, but what about winter? We got winter coming on, and winter to me is real interesting because a garden that looks like this, by the way, this is a shot of my yard. Well, this is the way it used to look. 2 years ago, it looked like that. I'll show you another picture a little bit. This is from the house looking toward the street, but it can look like this in the wintertime. Isn't that cool? It looked like that for one day. And then there was a few little tufts of white stuff after that. But anyway, we have some interesting things. Here's one of my flower pots made out of a tire. It's just a cut inside-out tire. Some people say, well, you can't do that. That's tacky. That's poor folks. That's country. And I'm thinking, shut up. You got a half whiskey barrel. That wasn't made for flowers either. It's recycled. So if you can recycle a whiskey barrel, if then, transitive property. If you can use a whiskey barrel, I can use a tire. That's what it looks like in the wintertime. Here's what it looks like in the summer. Oh, yeah, it's stenciled. Because I don't want people to think, I am recycled, but I'm not trashy. Anyway, also my little water garden, that's a 4-foot diameter, I don't know, it's a horse, what do you call those? They got it at Tractor Supply, they got them at Co-op. It holds water for horses and stuff, just a stock tank. Anyway, I put it in my yard, spray painted it a couple of different colors of brown to make it look old and rusty instead of, silvery, and filled it with water. And guess what? I got a water garden, and I didn't have to dig a hole. I'm at the age now, I travel a lot, I'm busy, I'm lazy, I'm tired, I bend over, I see sparkly things, and so I don't want to do all that extra stuff, and I wanted a water garden, and I don't want to dig a hole. So I just put something on top, fill it with water, put some plants around it. It's got little goldfish in it. I bought some of those that were 25 cents a piece from PetSmart. I think they're meant to feed other fish with, but I got them in, I got $1 worth. And I still got them. And yeah, that's toilet bowl floats. Well, brass things out of a toilet bowl back thing. Because I had it. And what are you going to do? You can, it's on the kitchen shelf, and so I said, a toilet thing on the kitchen. Anyway, this is what it looked like last winter. And I'm glad I got the toilet floats because they make it look more interesting. Little lanyard that. And the fish are still there. I don't know if you can see, but I still got the water pump going just to keep it going. But anyway, you can have a garden that looks good in the wintertime. Sometimes a water feature gets a little creepy if you keep your pump going. I also have fire. I'm real bad about fire. I'm an Eagle Scout. I like burning stuff. I'm a guy. Give me some fire. I like water, I like fire. And in the winter, and I have it going all the time, but in the wintertime, I sit out there in the crackling, the flickering flames, you're mesmerized. I'll tell you something interesting from a human evolution point of view. For thousands of years, people have sat around fires, looking at those flickering flames for comfort, for food, for security, for warmth. And we sort of we get mesmerized by that. Because of that, in the past 60, 70, 80 years, since they've been a television has flickering images. And we stare at it, and we get mesmerized by it because we are used to watching flickering flames. Isn't that a crazy thing? That's one of the reasons we get addicted to watching television, because we're used to the comfort of staring at flames. See, this is not a horticulture talk, in case you're wondering. By the way, in the wintertime, I gave a talk to the Hospice Society in Memphis a couple of years ago. And this is what their garden looks like in the wintertime. Plant some, and they got daffodils coming up, but that's what the Hospice Society garden looks like in the wintertime. Instead of nothing, they put the plant labels. So I'm thinking, that's pretty cool. So I put some plant labels in my yard. There's nothing planted there. But doesn't it look smart? People say, ooh, that's nice. I'm thinking, whatever. Thank God for Wellbutrin. This is in late winter, this is the stuff you can have in your garden before azaleas. You know, azaleas are the party girls. Y'all remember Andy Griffith's show? Andy Griffith? And every now and then these fun girls from Mount Pilot, the party girls from Mount Pilot would come over. Y'all remember Daphne and Trixie? Y'all remember them? Hello, doll. You don't remember that? Anyway, these two women would come over from Mount Pilot, and three things would always happen. First of all, they would jazz everything up. Andy and Marnie always got in trouble. They always got in trouble. They came in, they jazzed stuff up. Second thing was they left. They went home. So it went woo, and then nothing. And the third thing was really pernicious. While they were in town, the attractive, hardworking, civic-minded Helen and Thelma Lou felt a little dowdy. They didn't, because these party girls are all painted up and woohoo. So the party girls came in, they jazzed stuff up, then they disappeared. And meanwhile, the hometown gals sort of disappeared. And I would submit to you, that's exactly what azaleas do to your gardens. They come up and everybody says, wow, this is great. I can't stand it. I got to calm down. This is beautiful azalea. Come see my yard right now because 2 weeks is just big green meatballs. Okay? They come in, they jazz stuff up, and then they're gone. Meanwhile, all this stuff disappears because it can't compete with the party girls. I'm just throwing that out. So if you got an azalea, pull it up and put your flowering quince in its place. And that way you'll have something that blooms really, really good before the azaleas. When the azaleas bloom, ride around, look at other people's. And that way, and let them have the meatballs the rest of the year. Is it mean? Am I being mean on a Saturday morning? I don't know. Middle of the winter, this is what my Granny's concrete chicken's out. Did y'all see my truck when you came in out there? Granny's chicken is in the back. I figured I had too much to carry. I had Granny's chicken a long time. But this is in the middle of the winter with the Nandina berries, Mahonia, Oregon grape holly, blooms in the wintertime. And it's got bees on it the day or two after a hard freeze. See, so you can have a nice looking garden. A crepe myrtle trunk there. Winter honeysuckle, big old shrub. I tell you something that's blooming right now that I don't have a picture of, but you know Eleagnus, that big shrub that everybody prunes all the time? It's in bloom right now, and it's one of the most fragrant flowers out there. Covered with pollinator, but they're hidden in all those leaves. But Eleagnus has got incredibly fragrant fall flowers. I grow mine as a vine up in the tree. A lot of people don't know. They keep it as a shrub and keep putting out all this growth and blooming. It's actually a vine. It's a vine. And if you put it by some trees, it'll grow up in it, cascade down, and it's just a beautiful vine, evergreen, has incredibly fragrant flowers. And then they make these little oblong banana-shaped fruits. Two of them will fit about the size of this in December and January, and they're perfectly edible. Little fruits. They don't taste like much, but they're edible. Anyway, wintertime stuff. Here's a Mahonia. Camellias, of course we know they'll take hard freeze. Look at these camellias that I picked the day before that hard freeze back in the wintertime. I didn't put another picture in there, but I have a picture of these same things the next day, and they were just all brown. All brown. But these are the kind of plants that were growing in my neighborhood in Jackson with no water, no sprays, no horticulture, just out there. And instead of having just one or two, some people have 3 or 4 different kinds. So here's a flowering quince. These bloom before azaleas. Any of y'all have one? It's just a terrific plant. You know they don't sell them much at garden centers. You know why? Because it's not an azalea. And that's what people come in asking for. Just saying. Winter berries, this is our native winterberry holly. Some people call it one that drops its leaves in wintertime. Possum haw with the good berries. My little garden, I like this is back in the spring, my snapdragons and things like that. But if you want a garden like this with the violas and the snapdragon stuff, you got to plant them this time of year. It's time to plant. You got to plan ahead to be a real gardener. And these are just some of the little flowers. The big pansies, the little violas, the little Johnny jump ups, which by the way, they're all edible. There's a little viola right there. They're edible. The big ones stick to the roof of your mouth, but other than that, they're fine. They're fine. How about larkspur? Any of y'all grow larkspur? Well, if you don't, this is the time of year to sow the seeds. You sow the seeds in the fall, it comes up in the winter, blooms in the spring, and then dies down. See, so if you want something like larkspur, you got to throw the seeds out this time of year. So how many of y'all got larkspur? Okay. Get her name, and next spring when they start to die down, she got a jillion seeds for you to sow, because yours comes up every year, right? How long is it? I mean, you got to do something to it. Yeah. Yeah. You know something really interesting? This thing is the individual flower is about the size of a toe, a big toenail. But have you ever noticed something unusual that's in the middle of every flower? You look at it up close, it's got a rabbit in it. You see the rabbit with the ears and little buck teeth and all? How many of y'all knew that? This is a stupid stuff. This is not horticulture. This is gardening. This is being raised with old ladies before cell phones and stuff, where they didn't have anything to do, so they took you out in the yard and they showed you stuff. By the way, in the South, old lady is not an age or a gender thing. It's a style. You do what you want to do because everything is okay. Same thing with wildflowers. You want wildflowers? Plant the seeds in the fall because they grow over the wintertime. They bloom in the spring and set seed and then they die. See, so if you want things like this in the spring, you got to plan ahead. In my little raised bed garden on the side of my house, I've got multiple layers of fencing because I've got raccoons and possums and rats and rabbits and butterflies and birds and squirrels. So I have all different kinds of fencing that I have to go through every time I want to plant something. But back in the fall, I planted some crimson clover seed. And it grows over the wintertime. And about 3 weeks after that, it started to bloom. I just cut it down with my string trimmer, turned it under, and the roots that had absorbed nutrients all winter and made nitrogen for thin air, and the tops turned up and made the most beautiful soil you'd ever seen. Instead of buying stuff, I grew it. Crimson clover. You put that right now, and that's what it'll look like in late February, early January. Any questions about that? Yeah, you can order it online, but most of the time a co-op's going to sell it, or a farmer shop, because it's used commonly as a, and you see it along the roadside too. You know, that's that burgundy stuff along the roadside. Anyway, that's about $1 worth of seeds. Just give you an idea what the lengths I go to keep critters out of my garden. And sometimes it works. We're going to have to do this pretty soon. I've got a few zinnias, and I want to get the most out of them. And so if we get us a light frost, I'll cover them up just to get an extra month. You know, we get, that cold snap, and then it warms back up for a long time. So I just got supply. I throw it over there, but I've got it where it's not on the plants. And in the morning, when the sun's off, I pull it off because it can get hotter in there than a black pickup truck with the windows rolled up in the sunshine. So that's going to be important. Now, when it comes to growing stuff to eat in containers, these are all grown in 5-gallon paint buckets in my front yard. 5-gallon paint buckets with a hole in them. Actually, I didn't put a hole in the bottom. If you put a hole in the bottom, the water comes out the bottom. That makes sense, right? But meanwhile, it leaves a stain or a spot or some decay on your deck or your patio. So what you do is you crush up some beer cans and put 3 of them out there and set it on those. Or you can buy little pot feet. But just get the pot up off the ground a little bit, an inch or so. I think lettuce is pretty. It's a pretty plant by itself. But there's all different kinds of lettuces, so many different kinds. I grow them going up my steps. Those are 4 pots of just different lettuces. In the wintertime, if it's going to freeze, I drag them in. I take scissors and I cut the older leaves off and I put vinaigrette on them and I eat them. See? I've been doing it. That picture's probably taken 4 years ago. I'm still doing that same pot every year. Different kinds of lettuces, 5-gallon buckets. I even have a hanging basket with lettuce, partly because the snails can't get to it, and we got slugs, and the dog can't pee on it, and that's a consideration. And now, but you give me a squirt bottle of vinaigrette, I don't even have to bend over to eat it. But I think that's pretty. It's pretty, and you eat it before it has a chance to die, and that's so much better than regular flowers. Kale in the wintertime, this is the wintertime shot on my front porch. That is an incredible plant. It'll take 0 degrees, and there's so many different kinds. This is one of my favorites. This is called lacinato. This is what it looks like in the springtime, but this plant right here will take below 0. It grows just like collards, but it's prettier, and you can eat it without having to cook it with bacon grease. You know, collards are nothing without bacon grease. Anyway, it's a pretty plant, and I grow it as a flower, and you break off all the leaves and you cook with it. And by the way, this lacinato, or dinosaur kale, it's called Tuscan blue. That's what the Tuscans used for centuries to make minestrone. Anyway, here's one in the springtime. This is what it looks like. It gets a little bit bigger. This is my little herb garden out front with the thyme and all. But this plant right here, anybody know what it is? I planted it in the fall. It grew like that. And in the spring, it did that, and then it had flowers on it. That's garlic. And you plant garlic now. You get a garlic, you peel it, get the individual cloves, stick them in the ground, and each one makes a cool little plant with a nice flower, which is edible, and then you dig it up when the leaves die down. It's got these cloves with all these garlic in there. I grow garlic in a container as a winter ornament. Daffodils, my great-grandmother had 350 different kinds. We grew, and all these years later, these growing in my yard have never been watered or fertilized or anything like that or divided. See, we got daffodils that, not all daffodils will do this. You know, Van Zyveren Brothers sells a bunch of stuff that's really, really pretty one time. Okay, like tulips and stuff. A lot of the daffodils need a longer, colder winter than we have. But we know that there's some varieties that do really, really well in the deep south with a mild winter. And this is where you're going to find them. By the way, the difference between these, you know, these are called paper whites, and these are called jonquils. You know, anybody know the difference between them besides one's white and one's yellow? By the way, they're all they're all narcissus. Granny used to say, white ones are narcissus, yellow ones are daffodils. Well, narcissus is Latin for daffodil. They're all narcissus. We call them daffodils in common English. Well, the reason I mention that because there's different species. This one, Narcissus tazetta, has clusters of real fragrant white flowers. But there's one with little flowers, usually multiple flowers, and really, really fragrant. These are that's a paper white. They're called jonquils. And here's how you can tell a jonquil from all the rest. Of all the daffodils, they got a butter knife-shaped leaf, you know, kind of wide, kind of flat. All daffodils have that, except for the species called Narcissus jonquilla. And their leaf is shaped like a quill, little skinny quill. So if it's got a quill, that's a jonquil. If it doesn't, it's some other kind of daffodil. Isn't that a stupid thing to know? And by the way, I like to force them in the wintertime. You put them in some gravel, right? Have y'all ever done that? You notice they get big and tall and they flop over? Well, these are planted identical same time. Same containers, same gravel, same bulbs, planted the same exact time. Why are these short and compact? And they smell just the same. Why are they short and compact? I threw some vodka in the water. You put alcohol in the water and it stunts their growth. I'm not making this up. It doesn't take much, just a little bit. You could kill them with too much. But this is 3 weeks after planting them. A little bit, you can use rubbing alcohol if you got it. But, well, it's a recipe. If you just Google daffodils and alcohol, it's like 1 part alcohol to 9 or 10 parts water. Depends on whether you use rubbing alcohol or gin, because they're different strengths. Anyway, It's a that's a stupid horticulture trick. I like that kind of stuff. By the way, everybody says you put them in gravel. I didn't have any gravel, but I got Mardi Gras beads, and they work. But that's what you can do with a little alcohol and water in the middle of the winter. How many of y'all think paper white smell like cat pee? Eau de feline. It smells just like cat pee to a lot of people. I'm just saying. What do you call this? What? Lily of the valley? Yeah, not lily of the valley. It's like a ground cover thing, grows up north. A lot of people call these snowdrops. But that ain't a snowdrop. They call it snowflake. And there's a difference. Snowflake, which we grow all the time, it got little bell-shaped flowers with little green dots around them. They call snowflake, leucosium. Here's a snowdrop. And they won't grow here. They need a long cold spell. They rot here. Just like tulips. Where tulips grow, real snowdrops will grow. And they're all over England. They're all over Vermont. They're all over Iowa. But here, they just peter out. So we stick with these right here. And if you want to call them snowdrops, I don't have any problem with that. You call them whatever you want to. Here we go. These are jonquils. Look at this is a regular daffodil leaf. Look at the little skinny quill-like leaves of jonquil. It's just a little stupid thing. You see, you can pull that out in Sunday school and people will think you're so smart. But they're going to argue with you. Here's my favorite. I had to have one daffodil that would be this called tete-a-tete. You can buy a big bag at Van Zyveren Brothers. They have multiple flowers per stem. They're about this tall when the leaves flower. When they finish flowering, the leaves don't flop over. And you plant one bulb this year, you got 3 next year. It multiplies. And it's a really dependable, low-growing. This is the one to put in your lawn because it only blooms this tall and the leaves don't flop over and look bad. But tete-a-tete is the daffodil to put in the lawn. It's paper whites and what do y'all call this? Anybody grow this? What do you call it? Painted arum. Arum italicum. It's a cool plant. Comes up in the fall, dies down in the winter. If you got hostas, hostas spring through fall, they die down. You put these with it, they come up in between your hostas. You have winter hosta. It's painted arum. And it has a cool flower in the springtime. It's about as big as my hand. But get this, after the flowers fade, they leave stems of red berries. And your hostas are just coming up, so it looks like your hosta's got berries. What I'm talking about is doing stuff for the winter time, the winter and the spring, that's so much more interesting than having just mulch or just grass. So you can have a great garden in the wintertime. Hellebores, people call it Lenten rose, grows in the wintertime, blooms in the wintertime. Look at all the different varieties, and it grows in the shade under oak trees, blooms in the wintertime. See, we don't grow these because they don't sell them at garden centers because people don't come in asking for them. They buy tulips, which bloom once and then that's it. Old white flags iris, this is a plant that dead people can grow. You see it in cemeteries all the time. What about hardy succulent? Any of y'all grow this one? What do you call it? What do you call it? Hens and chicks. Up north, they have a different plant called hens and chicks. Any kind of plant that the leaves fall off and make little plants, they call that hens and chicks. Okay, well, this is called graptopetalum, or a ghost plant, but hens and chicks. That'll take 0 degrees, sitting out in a pot on your porch all winter. And you remember that transitive thing? If that will do well, or there's some other succulents. Here's some that I grow. All of these will take hard freezes in a pot on your porch, on your patio, and all you got to do is maybe spray paint some. By the way, I spray painted these sticks to match my truck because there's a reason I didn't put this coat on. I was going to put this coat on, but I remembered it's after Labor Day. You don't do seersucker after Labor Day. See, I was raised right. But anyway, that's a collection of plants that doesn't get too much water in that little pot, so you don't have to worry about too much rain rotting it, and it grows right through the wintertime. We forget about that kind of stuff. These are some that are in the back of my pickup truck. That's oregano there, but these are dwarf agaves. By the way, one of those plants back there on the plant swap doesn't have any roots on it. It's one of these. That's as big as it gets. It's not that great big agave. So whoever gets it, it doesn't have a roots on it, but that's okay. You can wait till next year to plant it, and it's still going to grow. I kept my good dirt for myself. We have some that'll take broiling hot sun, all sorts of temperatures. This is in Tennessee. You can have a cool succulent garden outdoors if you want to. If you want to. This is in a parking lot. And then just to give you some idea of some of the shapes and textures you can have in the dead of winter with perfectly hardy things. So that was my point. We got the camellias, the paper whites, and nandinas. Nice little combination in your yard. They make a good camellia, nandina, paper whites with no water, no sprays, no that. I cut these flowers when my father passed away in January several years ago. Got them from his yard, which belonged to his mother-in-law, which belonged to her mother-in-law, my great-grandmother. They've been blooming out there before I was born. They were planted out there. So we got some cool plants for the wintertime. By the way, we grow roses in the cemetery downtown Jackson. There's the state capitol on the back, in between tombstones. Looking for roses that do well. One of my favorites is called, any of y'all grow this? Peggy Martin. Peggy Martin. This is a Peggy Martin rose, and it's called Peggy Martin because this lady named Peggy Martin lived down near Gonzales, South Louisiana, and when Katrina came in, her yard was surrounded by a levee, and it was no problem, but the water came up over the levee, and after the water outside the levee, she kept 20 feet of, the levee kept 20 feet of water in her house, in her garden for 2 weeks, salt water for 2 weeks. They finally dynamited part of the levee to get the water out, long after everything else gone, and that was still blooming. And so she dug it up. We know for a fact that it's been grown for over 150 years in the South. We know for a fact that no rose expert on earth knows the official name. It was just introduced through New Orleans, 150 years ago. Everybody grows it. They call it all sorts of stuff. Anyway, they decided to call it the Katrina rose, and now it's known as Peggy Martin. And yesterday, I got to meet her. And she gave me a rooted piece of hers. I didn't tell her I already had one. Because you can't hardly buy that plant. That doesn't look like much, but that will bloom this year. Next year, it'll be all over an arbor. But anyway, she preserved a plant. By the way, this is what my yard used to look like from the house looking out towards the street. What I've done since I was here last, and I'm getting older, and one of these days I'm going to have a stroke or I'm going to drop dead, and somebody's going to have to take care of my yard. And my son says, Dad, we're going to get a truckload of Mexicans and haul all that stuff off. So I said, why not, I spent a long time adding stuff and building stuff and adding and loving it all, but I decided I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to clean it up while I can and enjoy it as a deconstructive process, creative deconstruction. So I took that and turned it into this. Let me back it up. That looks okay, but it's messy looking, okay? This still has all the cool plants, and it comes and goes, but I don't have to worry about all the stuff. And it's a lot easier to take care of. Yeah, I've got bottle trees. I got lots of bottles. I tend to over-accessorize. For an old straight white guy, I tend to over-accessorize. My backyard looked like this. I live in a cabin in my backyard. This is where all my daffodils come up. And when they die down, I cut them down and cover it with mulch. I live in a little cabin back there. I turned it into this. Don't have to, mulch anymore, pull weeds. I just take a leaf blower and I'm done. I'm done. See, so it's creative deconstruction. Yopon holly, y'all know Yopon? Not 2 blocks from here is a weeping Yopon. Isn't that cool? The reason I'm showing that because it's going to be one of the replacement plants for crepe myrtles. Any of y'all have crepe myrtle bark scale yet? Not yet. Crepe myrtle bark scale is wiped them out. We're looking for alternatives. That's not a bad looking plant. By the way, I had some. Look what you can do with them. You can prune them into meatballs on sticks. Anybody have is it okay to do that? Can you prune plants like a boxwood into a ball or a hedge into a box? Is it okay to prune plants? Does it hurt the plants? No. People have been pruning privet hedges into gumdrops and meatballs forever. It does not hurt the plant to do that. from a plant physiology point of view, doesn't hurt it. Reason I'm mentioning that because I was talking to these rose people the other day, and they said you got to prune a rose above an outward-facing 5-leaflet leaf. Y'all heard that? 5-leaflet leaf. You can prune with cherry bombs. You can have a deer browse a rose down, it'll come back out and bloom. But they have reasons for doing that. You don't have to do all that stuff. Reason I mention that because I did something this past week with my son. Y'all the first people to see this. I committed crepe murder. Yes, I did. I love crepe myrtles. This is my son's house. Okay? He's the one who can decide what old folks' home I go into. So, and he's a hotshot lawyer. His wife is the mother of my granddaughter, my only granddaughter. I got to be nice to these folks. But it was dropping sap and drippy stuff and making it slippery and making a car, and it was getting a scale, and they didn't want to put poison around it, which is all you could do. So we decided to fix it. We took that. By the way, this is what crepe myrtle bark scale looks like. There is no long-term outlook for this. It will be here forever. And the only way to control is put liquid systemic insecticide around the tree in the spring when sap is going up. Doesn't work in the summertime and the fall. It has to be pulled up into the tree. So springtime is the only time you put this in and control it. Well, instead of dealing with that, this is what we did. Now, this is crepe murder. Yeah. But I don't have a real picture of it, but those long branches and all, I'm using them as a fence around my yard. Stand them up. And I'm going to put bottles on the stems. That's what it looks like now. We have an opportunity to come up with something new. It's going to be something kind of fun. By the way, that agave that I brought said it'll grow anywhere. I don't know if you can see, but I stole it from my son's boy when he wasn't looking. So the plant I brought came from my boy who got it from me. So I want to just throw this out. Knowing that you can, and by the way, we cut that tree to the ground. What's it going to do next year if we don't grind the stump out? It's going to sprout back out. You can prune a crepe myrtle with a pickup truck and a drunk driver, and it'll sprout back out. Doesn't hurt to prune it. So knowing that, what's wrong with doing that? Cutting it back into little stems. What's wrong with that? Well, Southern Living says it's crepe murder. Southern Living, Steve Bender and Linda Askey invented that term as a joke. I was there. It was after a program. It came out of a glass of gin. That's exactly where that came from. And they're saying, well, you should do that. Well, this is Colonial Williamsburg. They've been doing it for centuries. Because what they do is they cut these plants back and they grow those weaving things for their fences. They cut them back. They send out all the long stuff. They cut them off. They weave their fences with it. And they cut some to the ground and let them sprout back up. And 3 years later, they got perfectly uniform fence posts. It's called coppicing for fence posts, pollarding for those things. So if you want to weave some stuff like they did at the Ag Museum, this is what you do. You cut them back, and they sprout back out. Next year you do that, and they bloom on new growth. There's a reason for it, horticulturally correct. So if you don't like it, that's a style thing, not a horticulture or physiology thing. If you don't like doing it, don't do it. But if you want to do it, do it. Crepe myrtle at the American Horticultural Society headquarters, Virginia. I'm a board member, okay? I go there a lot. This is the way they're supposed to look, right? Or look at this one in the back. See that? That's at the American Horticultural Society headquarters. They're not stupid. They're not tasteless. They know what they're doing, and that was been done like that since 1918. That's 104 years. Horticulture people think is okay. So whether you're this kind of person or that kind of person, hold your head up. Don't criticize other people. Or, as I like to show, some of y'all have seen this before, the kind of people who say you're bad because you prune your crepe myrtle are the same kind of people who come to your house during a party and turn your toilet paper roll around because they're not the way they do it, okay? If you don't want to do it, don't do it, but shut up. They do it at the Baptist church. Growing in just plain dirt, this time of year to grow compost. If you want to grow stuff like this, you got to pile stuff up this time of year. And you don't have to have I have a two system. I pile one up, and when it's full, I pile the other one up. And when it's full, I'm starting to dig out of the other one. So every year I fill one up, I'm digging out of the other. Next year I fill it up, dig out, back and forth. I don't turn it, don't aerate it, don't bioactivate it. I don't care about carbon-nitrogen ratio or thermophilic bacteria. I know that kind of stuff. I can make your eyes bleed with stupid detail, make you feel stupid because you don't do all that stuff. But here's the rules for composting. Any questions? It's a leaf pile. It's okay. Relax. If you want to speed it up, I can help you. But if you just want a leaf pile it up, dig it out of the side. Pile it, just dig it out of the side. And what I have a Mardi Gras bead and a little army man, a little plastic army man I put in there, and every year it's sort of like the baby Jesus in a king cake. When's it going to show up? And I wrote it back through year after year after year. Since my son was a kid, he's an Army officer now. Still got his little Army guy. And then I tend to accessorize. This is my Saint Fiacre. Y'all familiar with Fiacre? Official patron saint of gardeners. He's got flowers in a shovel. Not that bird guy. What's his name? Francis? That's the garden guy. And Granny's chicken. I put Granny's chicken. I've been to Versailles. I've seen 8-foot naked goddess statues. But Granny's chicken looks better in my yard. Right scale, right style. And so I put her out there. Anyway, I want to throw this out because I have to. I'm a bottle tree kind of guy. I like to have color, even in the wintertime. When there's not much out there, you put stuff in your window to make you feel better, keep your pineal gland fluffy so you don't get all depressed and all. It's poor man's stained glass is what it is. And then what you do is just move it out to the yard. It doesn't have to be a bottle tree. I mean, you could have a traditional bottle tree. Here's one in my yard that's what it looks like when it's what I call naked. And here it is with tomatoes growing on it. And here it is in the wintertime. See, where there was nothing but grass before then. Yeah, I put lights on them too. I've got one that's all green. If you're not sure about bottle trees, think about one that's all green. It sort of disappears. It's not a poke in the eye to your neighbors. And it looks kind of cool with it, sort of like an arborvitae without the bagworms. And look at it late this summer and backlit. I know I've gone over a little bit of time, but I want to throw out one last little thing. I've talked about plants, and I've talked a little bit about process, about growing plants. And there's 3 things that make a garden a real garden. One is plants, and you can have plants along the roadside, between here and Jackson, all over the interstate. You have plants, they don't care about people. They just grow. They'll sort things out according to habitat and, soils and all like that. So plants will grow by themselves. But then people start seeing them and say, I like that one, I like that one, I like it, a buffet, and pull them together, and they water, they prune, they mulch, they do the process to make the plants grow better and look better together. That's horticulture. So you got the plants and you got the process. But there's a third thing. It's called people. All the different kind of plants you pull together, your choice. The different ways you grow them or prune them or not, your choice. And it starts to get complicated. But when you start putting in different kinds of people, you start having different kinds of gardens. Except in suburbia, where you have to jump through hoops and be like everybody else. That's okay to do that. But which kind of person you think is going to have the most interesting garden? Yeah, the crazy lady, the crazy guy, the ones that we think are nuts. Well, they're not nuts. When you go to a Saints game, all these guys are dressed up like that, and they're weird, but they feel okay because they're together. They get together, and they put on their paints and stuff, and it's okay because they're together. Well, but if you take one of them and put him by himself and walk him up and down the street here in Meridian, people are going to talk about him. He's perfectly okay with his people. But when he's walking up and down the street by himself, people are going to talk about him. And that's what we do with gardeners who are different. Except gardeners can't get together in a Super Bowl. They don't have a venue. They're stuck out there. They're this guy stuck out, and people talk about him without realizing he's part of a tribe. And people who garden the way they want to garden, they're the same way. They're just like this, okay? They're just like this. And they're okay, but they don't fit in. They color outside the line. They're odd socks, okay? I call them keepers of the flame, because these kind of people, they're not rebels, they're not pushing back, they're just simply doing their thing. And that's where you're going to find the coolest plants, the old pass along thing. They get them together and they share these plants, and they keep them going when the garden centers don't have them. And then all of a sudden, when we need those kind of plants, they're right there. That's where I mine them for gardeners. And that's what I wrote about this book called Maverick Gardeners. It's what I call determined independent gardeners. And some people talk about them, like this lady spray paints her favorite NASCAR drivers on her elephant ears. That's NASCAR drivers. She's not crazy. She has two passions, gardening and NASCAR. She puts them together, you know. And I want to celebrate that spirit. I want to celebrate that spirit. Children garden like this. Children, they mix stuff up. They don't care about shapes. They recycle it in and pretty. The kids do. They don't know about coloring inside the lines. They just color. But we grow out of it. When we get to be teenagers, people start talking about it. You got to fit in. You got to, tuck your shirt. You got to fit in. And then you grow up, and all of a sudden, if you're coloring outside the line, you're not going to be popular. Well, you get old enough to have hair growing over your ears and stuff like that, you don't care about popularity anymore. And you still garden like a kid. And it's okay. It's okay. Just nobody celebrates it. This lady in Jackson, her son died, a way of dealing with grief, and she started putting birdhouses out in her yard. And how she deals with grief. They call her the birdhouse lady. This is the grief garden. As a fellow lives 3 blocks from me, it'd be hard pressed to tell, but he's a great big old black guy. He's 45 years old. He said, Felder, I don't look like I'm supposed to be doing this. And he said, all my people talk about me, but I was raised with gardening, and this is just the way I do. He has something in bloom every day of the year. And his next door neighbor was an older woman. She said in her whole life, she had never, ever seen a hummingbird until he started growing stuff. And his garden, of course, it looks like a garden club lady on crack, okay? But he knows all of his plants, he knows their names, and he shares with people, he waves to people, and nobody else on the street does that. This is the lady from Jamaica who is a retired mental health nurse. Her garden is from the house looking out. You're looking at the back of her garden. She sits on her porch and smokes cigarettes and watch people come by looking at her yard. And people say, well, she's a little bit nuts. No, she doesn't have any grass to mow, that's for sure. So I think that makes her smart. But look at the kind of stuff that Jenny grows in her garden. And by the way, the plant that back here that I got from my son's house, he got from me, I got from her. So whoever has the pass along plant, that's where it came from Jenny's garden, Jenny Nelson. And look at the kind of flowers that she grows this time of year in her garden. And everybody else has got wall-to-wall grass and nothing's dropping meatballs across the front of her yard. So I think that she's worth celebrating, not worth talking about. And you can do it too. You can do it too. Any of y'all remember Dr. Dirt? He was my co-host for 10 years. Whole chapter. This book actually started out to be about dirt. Dr. Dirt, Leon Goldsberry. Because he's such an incredible person. No horticulture, no hose. He just grew stuff in just plain old dirt dirt. He watered by putting his potted plants in the ditches when it rained. He caught rain bear. He gardened like my great-grandmother did back before hoses and before Miracle Grow and before Weed and Feed. He grows plants from all over the place. And he is fantastic. He'll grow anything and anything. Anything and anything. He's been in Southern Living. He's been on HGTV. He passed away 4 or 5 years ago. But every single week for 4 years, when he came to do the radio program with me, he's my co-host. Every single week, he brought a bouquet of flowers that he cut that day or the day before from his yard. Every week of the year, he had something to show. It's just incredible. The reason I want to mention that is because this is what his garden looked like about this time of year before he passed away. Okay, this time of year. He passed away, and within 2 years, it looks like that. Because gardening is ephemeral. And when you find somebody who has this spirit, this attitude, doesn't matter who they are, who the mom and them are, what church they go, it doesn't matter. They are precious spirits. They tend to over-accessorize. They tend to look kind of wild. but they're exuberant, and they typically outlive the people in their family. So, if you have a chance, you don't have to have a garden like this. Find a kid. I end my radio program every week, show a kid, go out and show them how to get dirty. You could just bend down on the ground and find a roly-poly or a pecan or a little flower. You can find something to talk to a child about, to focus them on plants, on the real life. You can do that. When my daughter was young, I made her smell magnolias. She's 32 years old now. A lot of ink, a lot of piercings. She's real popular, has the most wonderful chuckle, good sense of humor. She looks weird, and I can't talk. But for the rest of her life, every time she sees or smells a magnolia, she can be transported back to being a little kid in her daddy's garden, and I'm going to be alive because I showed her something real simple that stuck with her for the rest of her life. I want to show you this picture. Remember I mentioned my goldfish? Can you see it right there? This is the first picture. This is taken this past summer. My granddaughter, my only granddaughter. First time she could walk around in my yard, and her mother wasn't watching us because she thinks that I'm creepy. Took her out there, showed her that. This is the first picture of me and my granddaughter. This picture, if I drop dead today, she will always have this picture of her and her granddaddy in a garden. And she'll remember that when she was wiggling around in there, I gave her a little piece of this little skinny-looking goldfish food, put it in there, and a goldfish came up and ate it from her fingers. And she did this. And I feel like I've passed the baton. I've passed the baton. Her first wildflower, a dandelion. And my last 3 slides, I just want to throw this out because I'm getting her to help me with this now. I was raised, my dad was a school teacher. We had to make do. We couldn't go out and buy stuff. And so we learned to make Christmas ornaments from stuff in the yard with some paint and some white glue and glitter. Just want to look at this. It's the sweet gum balls with toothpicks and glitter. By the way, this is not in the book, but let me tell y'all, if you use glitter, trust me on this, it will show up in your underwear for years. If I get pulled over, if I have a wreck to take to the hospital, they say, "You got glitter." Well, because I'm like this. I'm like this. Anyway, that's all I had to share. Oh, by the way, I want to show you this. Isn't this great? Wow. Some of y'all aren't old enough to get this. Some of y'all aren't old. My mother told me not to thank anybody for a plant because it won't grow. But if you pass a piece along to somebody else, that's the way to do it. My great-grandmother's garden journal, what was blooming in her yard and in her grandmother's yard in 1914. Over the years, a lot of it didn't make it, but I came with a little publication called Heirloom Plants for Southern Garden. These are the kind of plants that won't die. I'll send you one for free if you'll send me an email. I mean, you got to print it yourself. But it's got all this kind of stuff. Native plants, got a brochure on that. Fruits for the landscape, got a brochure on that. Heirloom plants, hardy daffodils, one on roses that will bloom spring to fall. I do that kind of stuff because I'm a retired extension service. I don't have a job anymore. So if you'll shoot me an email, if you have a question, if any of y'all ever said, send me a publication, and I did it, I will. If you want to know how to do it, go to this, Felder Rushing blog. I don't sell anything. You can't buy my books there. Don't want to do that. And it's got little things that email me. Send me a thing on daffodils or roses or fruits or heirloom plants, whatever. And I'll send it right back to you because that's what I do. And the folks here at the Max have been really good to have me over and sharing with y'all. I went kind of over, but it's Saturday morning, and when I get done, I'm walking over here and hoping the tamale truck is still there. But the Master Gardeners got a plant sale, and they're selling plants that they grew themselves and dug from their yard. They're guaranteed to grow here. Tell them I said, hey. Thank y'all for attention this morning. That's it. Oh.